Nolan's latest movie, Oppenheimer, is finally out in theaters, so that means it's time to re-rank all of Christopher Nolan's filmography from worst to best. This is all 12 of his movies, and just as a point of reference, I love about 80% of this dude's filmography. The rest of his filmography, I just like. So that just goes as far to say that Christopher Nolan is, for me, one of the best directors of all time, and I'm very excited to give you guys my ranking, because this was a very hard one. It always changes up, and I definitely can't wait to hear your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. So leave your thoughts, hit that like and subscribe button, and without further ado, let's get into this. Coming down at my number 12 is Following. This is Christopher Nolan's very first film that was made for under the budget of $10,000. It also was just filmed over an entire year where Christopher Nolan got his friends together, borrowed equipment, and made this movie, which just goes as far to show you. This is not the best made movie in the world, but it's a movie that when you watch it, you can go say, yeah, okay, Christopher Nolan had talent even back then with the lowest and minute amount of money, equipment, and people involved. Nolan knew what he was doing. And I think for me, Following is the only film on his filmography that I just don't care to rewatch. I've seen it once, I really enjoyed it, thought the performances were great, but the thing that I just kept sitting there going was, yeah, this is a fantastically directed indie film, and that's exactly what it is. This is a cool film that if you've never seen it, you should go back and revisit it now after seeing his entire filmography to truly see the vision that Christopher Nolan had put together, because once you actually figure out the pieces and where everything kind of goes, Following really comes into its own. At my number 11, I already know this is going to be a hot take. I know so many people love this movie, but at my number 11, it's Memento. I have never been a drastically big fan of this film. I watched it even before I knew who Christopher Nolan was, and I thought it was cool. And I've tried every single other year, I try to rewatch this movie to kind of just finally figure out if I'm going to fall in love with it. And I think about 2-3 years ago, I'd noticed I'm never going to fall in love with this film. It's not for me. I just don't think I'm that smart for this film. It is a highly intelligent film, and it's one of Christopher Nolan's arguably best scripts. But for some reason, I think his direction is a little bit iffy on the entire film. I find it just drags a bit. I think the performances are absolutely incredible. There's something to be said about Guy Pearce's performance in here, and I wish he would just come back and work with Nolan once again, because it's been so long. But Memento is a trippy and unique thriller that is unlike a lot of what we've seen, and I've always found that this is a great idea that's executed in an okay way for me. I've never been built up to the hype. I saw this before any of the hype had come out, and I watched it and I was like, that's a cool movie, and that's about it. Again, I know there are diehard fans for Memento, but this one, just not my personal cup of tea, but I do realize the brilliance of it all. Number 10 now is Insomnia. Now, this movie is actually kind of wild, the fact that it does come onto Christopher Nolan's entire filmography, because when you compare it to every other film on his filmography, this is the one that, like, doesn't have the biggest twist in the world, nor the one of the biggest plots, no matter how small or scale it is. It's a film starring the likes of Al Pacino, Hilary Swank, and of course Robin Williams, and it's a murder mystery. It's a pretty basic murder plot, I would say. I've seen this 1,000 times before, but what actually does elevate it is the performances and Christopher Nolan's direction here. I think Christopher Nolan's direction here is actually one of the most important parts, and this film primarily is something very important for his entire career, because without this film, some people have even said that he may have never gotten Batman Begins, because after this movie, it showed that he can work in the studio system and work with big main actors like this, which then eventually did get him Batman Begins, which honestly really did open up his career to a whole new defining purpose. And Insomnia is kind of important for his entire career, but it's one of those ones that I've only seen a handful of times, and I don't really ever care to rewatch it. Not because it's bad, not because it's boring, just because I'd rather rewatch other Christopher Nolan movies. I think Insomnia is a really brilliant little thriller, and specifically a lot of that is because of the direction from Nolan, but I also do think that Al Pacino is fantastic in here. Hilary Swank, who I am not the biggest fan of as an actress, I thought she's fantastic in here, and Robin Williams. I mean, he's fantastic as well. Get down to my number 9, which is Dunkirk. Dunkirk is the film for me that I just want to love, but I just really, really like it. And I think that Dunkirk, for me, the way that it intersplices 3 different storylines all happening at once, and it really much takes out the romanticizing element of the war aspect, but actually puts in just you in the forefront. A couple things to make this film even better. I wish they would have truly centered in on a character or two. I think that's the one aspect that does hold this film back, is that in every war film, there's always a character you can center on, and in more of Dunkirk is an experience more than an actual retelling and feeling for one of the soldiers. But as that purpose, as an experience, you definitely feel the war. The other aspect is I do wish that Dunkirk was rated R. I think out of all of Christopher Nolan's movies, this is the one that actually feels like it should have been rated R. And I wish it would have been. Every time I go back to rewatch it, I feel like it loses a little bit of oomph to its intensity. Besides that, though, the score is brilliant. The sound design and the sound mixing is incredible. I think on a technical achievement, Dunkirk is one of Nolan's best when it comes down to sound and technical aspects. The action is intense. The cinematography is stunning. Nolan did a great job on this, and I think at this point in time in his career, this was a technical achievement for him. That achievement has gone further than most have now, but I think Dunkirk is a brilliant watch, but it's just, again, one of those ones that I just don't rewatch all too often. We get up to my number 8, and just as a point of reference, this film and up, I actually would give all of these films a 5 out of 5, which you may disagree with, and that's okay. At my number 8 is The Dark Knight Rises. This film, on a pure spectacle, it's amazing. I love the emotion that Nolan actually brings into this film, and primarily how you can feel for this version of Bruce Wayne and Batman, as well as the city of Gotham and how much we have loved these characters over the last trilogy that we got with the Batman in this world. And Dark Knight Rises, for me, I think Tom Hardy, there's an argument to be made that he is the best villain of this entire trilogy. I think Anne Hathaway's portrayal as Catwoman is brilliant, but the thing that actually really holds Dark Knight Rises above everything else is I love where Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne is at his time in life when everything starts to open back up. He's been a recluse. He's kind of just hidden out after the events of The Dark Knight that have really changed not just Gotham City forever, but truly much Bruce Wayne's life forever. It's one of those things that definitely showcases a character that has risen out of the shadows, someone who has kind of fallen. And I like how the rises part kind of shows two different equivalents to that. Who's finally coming out of the shadow to come into the limelight alongside Talia al Ghul. And you also have Batman himself, who's also coming back, trying to dominate and take control of Gotham, one trying to save it, and one trying to destroy. Everything that Batman and Bruce Wayne have really much tried to do in helping the city that he loves. And I found that The Dark Knight Rises is just, when you look at everything, it's an epic culmination of anything that Nolan has done. And I think there's nitpicks to be made in this film, but I would give this film a 5 out of 5 just purely on an entertainment level and on an emotional level. Because this has the best action out of all the Batman films that Nolan has developed. And it also has, when you look at all of his films, one of the most emotional stories that he's ever told. And we get to my number 7, which is The Prestige. This movie I watched for the first time like 5 or 6 years ago, and it blew my freaking mind by the twists, the turns, everything of that nature. Christopher Nolan truly made a household name for himself with this movie when it came out after Batman Begins, and you can truly see whether you have Christian Bale and you have Hugh Jackman and of course Scarlett Johansson, but the whole thing about obsession and that ideology about obsession as two magicians are rivaling to become the best, and how that all plays out is just one of the most amazing things that I've seen. I've seen some people complain about the way that the magic is used throughout here, but I absolutely love it. I absolutely think that, again, it is one of the most twisting and turning things that you could ever see into this story. And I think when you look at top 10 twists of all time, The Prestige should absolutely be right there. I also think the other reason that this film succeeds is due to the direction from Christopher Nolan, the way that he was able to direct all of these sequences, all of these twists and turns, that when you do see that twist, and at first you're a little bit confused by all these different things happening in the third act, when you go back and rewatch the film, knowing what's going to happen opens up the floodgates to where you can realize what's going to happen now. Hugh Jackman's brilliant in here. Christian Bale's brilliant in here. Scarlett Johansson's brilliant in here. The entire cast is brilliant in here. Really enough, Nolan is brilliant here. 6 now is Batman Begins. I love this movie, and I actually think before Robert Pattinson's Batman movie that this was the best singular live-action Batman film that we had ever gotten, and some days I even think it's better than The Dark Knight. I know, blasphemy. Today, I obviously don't, but The thing with Batman Begins is, I love how Christopher Nolan kind of went for a more realistic take on the entire of Gotham City, but still infused a lot of aspects of what makes Batman so important. Christian Bale's entire origin story here as Bruce Wayne really brings this prolific aspect to the character, and I actually still think that Bruce Wayne's portrayal, because that's always a very important part of Batman, Christian Bale probably gives arguably the best version of Bruce Wayne that we've had yet. Him, Val Kilmer are just side by side, just great portrayals of that version of Bruce Wayne. And when it comes down to Batman, that's the one thing that I don't think Christian Bale completely nailed, but that could also go to what Nolan did as well. But Begins is more of a solid Batman and Bruce Wayne drama than anything else. It's not just a straightforward action blockbuster that we have seen countlessly in the past, and I love what Batman Begins was able to provide to us and give to us. And the entire third act with Scarecrow's entire nightmare vision, one of the cool sequences, and I still contend to this day that I really need Christopher Nolan to just do a straightforward horror film. Because between this film and now Oppenheimer, that guy has a vision for horror. On my number 5 though, this one I'm gonna get shit for. I know this is probably gonna be a lot of people's number 1, but my number 5 is The Dark Knight. Now, as a full disclosure, I've never seen this film in theaters. Never got the chance to. I hope to one day see it in theaters, but I've only watched it at home, and I think this movie is absolutely fantastic and incredible. The thing and reason it's not that high up is I find that the third act is just a tad bit underwhelming. It's still great, but for an entire 5 out of 5 movie, that's the one aspect that holds this film back just a bit. I just don't have the love for The Dark Knight as many other people do. It is one of the best comic book films ever made, but I think Christopher Nolan's made 4 better movies that I would rather rewatch over this movie. To get that now and to dig me out of that hole, Heath Ledger is absolutely stupendous, amazing, fantastic as the Joker. Easily the best performance in one of the comic book movies that we've ever gotten. Alongside that, I think Christian Bale is fantastic, but when I do look at this film feels more like a Gotham City movie and a crime drama taking place in Gotham City than compared to an actual Batman film. And in a lot of ways, that's a smart tactic to use, specifically in the way that the opening sequence very much is reminiscent and a love letter to the film Heat, which, man, that opening sequence for The Dark Knight might personally be one of my favorite opening sequences to any film ever. A lot of the reason being because I'm a huge heist junkie. I love when I see bank heist movies, but The Dark Knight just got it. And every single moment in this movie just feels with this oomph and pizzazz that Nolan is able to deliver and give. And I love this movie. Now, my number 4 is Tenet. I love Tenet. When I first saw it, this was about middle of the road for me on Nolan films. I still loved it, but on the whole ranking, it was pretty low. Then I saw it a second time before I did my last ranking when this was included, and it was a lot higher on this list. A lot of the reason because Tenet for me is just, it's Christopher Nolan's James Bond in a lot of ways, with time travel, but his own version of time travel, and you see people going forward and other people going backwards, and a lot of it still does not make sense, but it's fascinating, it's entertaining, and it makes me want to rewatch it over and over and over because I'm entertained by the entire aspect and the sci-fi nature of what Nolan was able to do here. For me, yes, there's not really an emotional depth to this film. Yes, the main character's name is literally called the protagonist because that is literally what he is. In a lot of different ways, this is more of just an experience than an actual in-depth story. And while I said that the experience aspect of Dunkirk was the strongest part about that, and I wish they went a little bit deeper with the characters, sure, I wish I could want that in Tenet. I kind of love how much of an experience Tenet was. I love how much every time I go back to rewatch this movie, how intense it feels. And whether it's John David Washington's fabulous performance in here, or Robert Pattinson just being a great side character to him, and kind of being his just buddy duo right there, the film just continues to go in places that never feel real, but it all feels practical. And by the end of the film, I was on edge. And specifically when you start looking back at all the little correlations and how everything led up to that one point, that one intersection, the film just makes me feel like it's so brilliant. And I know not everyone loves this one. I know a lot of people have this a lot lower on their list, but I love what Christopher Nolan was able to do with his version of James Bond in this world. I truly think this is one for the ages in the terms of action and sci-fi films of all time. I think in a way, while this film didn't blow it at the box office due to COVID, I think in some ways Tenet will be looked at as a cult classic in a lot of different moments. Specifically, when you look at his entire filmography, this seems like one of those important films that when you watch it, you're like, man, how did more audience members not love this? Now we get to my number 3, which is Oppenheimer. This is Christopher Nolan's crowning achievement as a director, as a writer, as a creative visionary. When people look back at Christopher Nolan for his career, they will look at 3 films primarily. They'll look at The Dark Knight, of course, for what he transcended and changed into the comic book movie genre. They will look at Inception for what he was able to do with the sci-fi action story and what he did with practical effects. They will look at Oppenheimer as an American epic drama about the one man who changed the world after the atomic bomb was created. The father of the atomic bomb in a lot of ways. Oppenheimer is a film for me that I've not read the book. I'm happy I didn't, because talking to people who did read American Prometheus, a lot of them were more favorable towards that. But Oppenheimer is a movie that the more I sit on it and blown away by every aspect of the movie. Now, as a full disclosure, I did get to see this in IMAX 70mm. And while a lot of people will say, well, it's not worth seeing in IMAX because it's just a lot of talkie-talkie, I think if you can see it in IMAX 70mm, because it's so rare when filmmakers do make films like this, and you have a theater that allows that, I recommend it. Because it'll blow your mind the way that Christopher Nolan uses the entire IMAX screen, the fact that the film grain, this just feels like one of those old school Hollywood movies that you just don't see nowadays. And seeing how well it did at the box office is incredible and just a testament to what Christopher Nolan can do as a director. Because the fact that Oppenheimer pretty much tells 3 different stories at 3 different parallel storylines, but each and every one of them all intersect, kind of like how he did with Dunkirk, but on one man's life. And how this film wasn't just about the explosion or the bomb, because that wasn't even the best aspect of it, which it was incredible, and it was beautiful, and in the same way, horrifying. The way that Christopher Nolan used the bomb's explosion as a way of, when you're looking at it like that is a thing of beauty, but all of a sudden it changes and flips over, and when you look at it from the other end, after the beauty, and you see the destruction it can bring, it brings the horror to people's eyes. And specifically Oppenheimer, what he noticed, that holy shit, we just created the most powerful weapon in the entire world. And, not to get into full spoilers, but the final 3 minutes of the film, the final monologue from Oppenheimer, which really brings this fascinating approach, makes me look at all these other moments. Bomb's crescendo is in the middle of the movie. Then you have a whole other hour, because it's an entire epilogue to what happened to Oppenheimer afterwards, what his feelings were. And you get this horror-like moment where he's being celebrated, but in his eyes, all he's viewing is death and what this bomb is to do. And how people don't understand the power of this bomb. But he did. And he, while again, did not call the strike, he was hand in hand in that destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all of that. And it's absolutely devastating to him. It's a devastating masterpiece in a lot of ways, because we follow one man who is arguably one of the smartest people who have ever lived and created stuff. And his mind created the most devastating weapon that now transcends to today's world. And what that made, that ripple effect, that domino effect. It's beautiful, it's stunning, it's absolutely amazing, and I loved Oppenheimer completely. As another point of reference, again, Christopher Nolan's direction here is absolutely stunning and stellar, but it is Cillian Murphy's performance and Robert Downey Jr.'s performance hand in hand. Both of them should be nominated as of right now, should win the Oscar. Now, my number 2, it is Inception. Inception, for me, is actually one of my favorite films of all time, because it got me so much into filmmaking and dissecting movies, but it does come into my number 2 because I think, for me, this is one of those important films in Nolan's filmography. My number 1 film, though, is my favorite of what he's done, and we'll talk about that soon, but Inception, first off, like I mentioned earlier with The Dark Knight, I'm a heist junkie. I love bank heist films. I love heist things like this, and in a way, this is about people jumping into dreams to steal stuff. That is fascinating in its own right, and it's crazy that Nolan was able to get that approval, but when you pitch that idea, it is weird, it is wacky, but it works, and it actually feels very straightforward. While a lot of the concepts and the ideas can be a little bit confusing, The more you watch this film, the more you get it, the more you understand the devices, and while it all feels a little bit, again, kooky and ham-held, Christopher Nolan itself just does such a great job as a director being able to develop each and every one of these ideas, so it makes it feel straightforward, and it makes it feel dramatic, and it makes it feel serious and real and even believable. And whether you're looking at the sequence with the entire room shifting and changing and Joseph Gordon-Levitt having an entire fight choreographed sequence in there, that's amazing, to all the other things of when the dreams are coming reality. You have the shootouts, you have all these different moments. In a way, this is his version of Heat. This is the version that he wanted to portray. This is the version that he wanted to give. And I love how we're able to get that. And then you have DiCaprio, who's absolutely phenomenal in here, and has this emotional tale how all he wants to do is get back to his kids. You have, of course, Tom Hardy making one of his fabulous performances. Great stuff in here. Elliot Page is awesome as well. The more and more I think about this movie, the more incredible I think it is. On a technical achievement, on what he was able to do as a director, as a writer, and make it all seamlessly flow to where it doesn't feel confusing. And that's a lot, because as we can see with Tenet, which I think Tenet did need quite a few other viewings to it, you can pretty much understand the entire concept, but as you continue to watch it, it makes it more and more insane, to say the least. So I love Inception, and I love what it gives. At my number one, it is Interstellar. Interstellar for me is my favorite Christopher Nolan film, mostly for the biggest fact that it is his most emotional one. And I'm a huge junkie for when it comes down to sci-fi exploration and specifically space exploration. But when you dive into the concept of the world is ending, we have to find a planet that we can inhabit and live on. But the way that Christopher Nolan actually uses time and black holes and all those elements mixed together brings for an emotional experience, because it's one guy who just doesn't want to leave his family. And when he leaves his family and they go to that one planet and they fuck up and you're on that planet and they find out that they lost years of time because of one mistake. And you go back and see Matthew McConaughey's brilliant performance of seeing all of his kids grow up through this time. And them probably thinking my dad died. It's brilliant. And it's devastating. And it's beautiful. The way that they make space look, the visual effects are insane. Everything of that nature is beautiful, but it's an intense ride. And the way that it's all bonded and bridged by one man's love for his kids, specifically his daughter, is the best aspect of this entire movie. And Interstellar, for me, remains a monumental achievement in Christopher Nolan's career because of that emotional avenue. A lot of people will say that he's a very dire, not very much emotional spoken director. And Interstellar proves that completely wrong. It's weird at first, and I'm not going to lie. When I first saw Interstellar, I really liked it, but I didn't love it. But I've come to love it over the last 5 years as I've just really much rewatched it. And this is another one that I have not seen in theaters. I hope to one day be able to see it in theaters. But it's one I revisit every year. And the second it comes down, the entire third act with the bookshelves, and I know that doesn't really make sense for everyone, and not everyone loves that part. It's one of the things that really makes a lot of sense for me, and for me as a viewer, love that moment so much because of what Christopher Nolan was able to develop, and how he's able to tie it back to one character. Maybe it doesn't make sense fully, maybe it never will. But I love what Christopher Nolan was able to do here, and I cannot believe what he was able to create with Interstellar. So with that, guys said, that is my Christopher Nolan ranking. I do want to let you guys know that this video was recorded during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Without the labor of the writers and actors currently on strike, the movies being covered here would not exist. I have a link down below to where you can go visit for more information. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for clicking on this. Again, this is a long-winded ranking, but I can't wait to get your guys' ranking down below in the comment section. Christopher Nolan's one of the best visionary and one of the best directors of all time. And we have a ton of videos coming out soon, so make sure to look forward to all those. But of course, until next time, stay classy.